In a distant galaxy, within the lawless region known as the Shadow Sector, 3 names were spoken only in whispers: Lucien Black, Celine Veyron, and Zajul, the Dark Lord. They were the undisputed rulers of the underworld, masters of crime, gambling, and deadly deals. The Shadow Sector was a place where illicit trade thrived. Betrayal was a currency, and black fortunes dictated the rules. Everyone who lived there felt the presence of these 3 figures. No one could win at their game, because for anyone who sat at the table, their fate was already sealed within the cards they held. Lucien Black was a former bounty hunter. Beneath his black suit lay a will of steel and a mind as sharp as a blade. When he first arrived in the Shadow Sector years ago, he had fought to survive and eventually rose to lead one of the most powerful crime syndicates. Very deal he made was soaked in blood and credits. Celine Veyron was as deadly as she was beautiful. She had started as an intergalactic thief, but soon took control of one of the largest casinos in the Shadow Sector. Her violet cape and black dress made her shine like a star in the darkness. Anyone who sat at her table would either double their fortune or lose their soul. And then there was Zajul. He wasn't even human. With his crimson eyes, demonic horns, and pitch-black armor, he was a terrifying presence. No one knew where he came from. Some believed he was a demon. Others thought he was an ancient warlord. The only truth was that he orchestrated the most fearsome deals. Those daring enough to sell their souls could gain unimaginable rewards. But the price was always set by Zajul himself. Tonight, in the grandest casino of the Shadow Sector, the 3 of them sat at the same table. Cards were being dealt. Fates were being decided. A tense silence surrounded them. This was no ordinary game. This was a battle for power between the 3 most dangerous crime lords in the universe. Who would win? Who would be betrayed? And, most importantly, who would survive by the end of this game? It was one of the darkest nights in the Shadow Sector. The Eternal Night, a hidden casino dimly illuminated by neon lights, was known for hosting the most secret gatherings of the galaxy's most feared crime lords. But tonight was no ordinary night. Lucien Black, Celine Veyron, and Zajul, the 3 rulers of the underworld, had gathered at the same table for the most dangerous gamble of their lives. At stake was a bet so great that it could alter their fates forever. But this time, it wasn't about credits or jewels. Tonight, they were gambling with their very lives. None of them trusted each other. Years of fragile alliances, betrayals, and bloody reckonings had made their partnership as delicate as a tightrope walk. Yet, change was brewing in the Shadow Sector. A new power was rising in the darkness, threatening to shake the foundations of their rule. This force had proven that someone from within was leaking information. One of them could be the traitor. But who? A direct attack would lead to chaos. Instead, as always, they would settle this with a game. If one of them was truly guilty, the gods of chance would decide their fate. If an innocent one lost, well, that would only prove their weakness. And in the Shadow Sector, the weak had no place. And so, they took their seats. The game of choice was old-world poker. But this was no ordinary poker game. Here, the value of the cards would be determined not just by the rules, but by the player's courage and bluffs. Lucien picked up his cards, his face a cold mask. His fingers lightly traced the edge of the table as he lifted his gaze toward Zajul. Zajul's crimson eyes glowed like an abyssal demon's. Was he grinning or merely baring his teeth? One thing was certain, he never lost. Celine, draped in her violet cloak, gracefully glanced at her hand. Her black nails tapped softly against the table, as if setting the rhythm of the entire game. "I can't wait to see just how brave you gentlemen really are," she purred, her voice smooth as silk but edged with steel. The bets were placed. Each of them wagered their own life. If one of them lost, the others would decide their fate. Would they allow them to live, or would a new grave be dug before the night was over? The cards were dealt, silence fell, and the game began. In the darkest corner of the Eternal Night Casino, a deadly game had begun. Lucien Black stared at his cards without blinking. He was calm, but inside a storm raged. Everyone at this table was a liar. He knew that. Selene wove every word like a trap. Zajul wasn't even human. Trying to understand how he thought was a game in itself. The first hand was played. Lucien went all in, pushing 20 million credits onto the table. He had a pair of kings, but his face gave away nothing. Selene narrowed her eyes, her violet cape shifting slightly. She was in. Zajul, moving slowly, placed his hand on the table. His deep, resonating voice spread through the casino like a dark omen. "I raise the bet." Lucien's brow furrowed. What was this demon so confident about? The cards were dealt again. Selene crushed the tip of her cigarette between her fingers, a faint smile lingering on her lips. That smile. Lucien hated it. Whenever she smiled, something went wrong. Selene elegantly pushed her chips forward. "Lucien, you're still overconfident," she murmured. Her gaze felt like it was piercing into his soul. Lucien hesitated for a brief moment. This woman always acted like she knew nothing, yet she knew everything. Was this a trap? Zajul smiled. Every single one of his teeth showed. Then silence fell. They weren't just playing with cards. They were playing in each other's minds. Lucien revealed his hand. A complete bluff. But Selene didn't even flinch. She already knew. Zajul won the round in silence. Lucien clenched his teeth. He was the first to lose. But the game wasn't over yet. Selene, at this point, was simply watching. Lucien was growing frustrated, while Zajul, he was hiding something. The cards were dealt. This hand would be deadly. Zajul leaned in. "You cannot defeat me," he whispered. His voice made the candles on the table tremble. Lucien glanced at his cards. If he lost another hand, his end was near. Selene took a slow breath. Then she smiled. "I think this game is starting to get a little boring," she said. She placed only one thing on the table, her life. Lucien froze. Zajul chuckled. Selene had just made the boldest move of all. "One of us won't be leaving this table," she declared. Tension reached its peak. In the shadows of eternal night, a deadly silence filled the air around the gambling table. The final hand had been dealt, the chips had been pushed forward, and at last the game had reached its conclusion. Lucian pressed his sweating palms against his knees. His last move had to be perfect. But it wasn't. When he revealed his cards, Zajul's eerie grin stretched even wider. Celine, too, kept smiling, but this time it was hollow. She had lost as well. Zajul had won. Zajul leaned back with deep satisfaction. His grin was anything but human, and his eyes burned like the gates of hell. The rule had been clear from the beginning. The loser would give the winner whatever they desired, and Zajul's desires were always the same. "I take your souls," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. Lucian instinctively reached for his weapon, but even moving was pointless. A shadowy black mist rose from the ground, twisting around the table like living darkness. For the first time, Celine's mask cracked. A flicker of fear flashed in her eyes. "Ah, my dear friends," Zajul purred with demonic delight, "when you make a deal, you pay the price." At that moment, the neon lights of the casino flickered violently. A deep rumble shook the ceiling. Then, explosions. Eternal night was under attack. Zajul's expression darkened. This was not part of his plan. Lucian and Celine, however, wasted no time. Lucian flipped the table and rolled backward. Celine, pulling a plasma dagger from beneath her violet cloak, disappeared into the shadows. But who was attacking? The doors burst open with a thunderous crash. A group of heavily armored bounty hunters stormed in. Their weapons glowed, their visors reflected the chaos. But the most terrifying figure stood at the front. A mysterious leader stepped forward, their face concealed by a futuristic mask. Their eyes glowed red, pulsating with cold, mechanical precision. Raising a small device in their hand, they spoke just one sentence. "A new order is coming to the shadow sector." Another explosion ripped through the casino, shattering Zajul's immortal darkness. As Lucian and Celine fled from a game that had nearly claimed their lives, they realized one chilling truth. They had just escaped death, only to step into an even greater war. With the collapse of the Eternal Night Casino, dust and neon lights swirled in the air. The echoes of the explosion still lingered, and the three great lords who had once ruled the table now stood vulnerable under the shadow of a new threat. Lucian Black drew his weapon in an instant. Selene Veron gripped the poisoned dagger hidden within her cloak, and Zajul, for the first time, stepped back. The mysterious leader approached the table with slow, deliberate steps. "You were supposed to be the most powerful," the voice echoed. "But all I see before me are losers." Lucian's brows furrowed. "Who the hell are you?" The leader's face was completely hidden behind a mask. But those eyes, those glowing red lights, were enough to make even Zajul avert his gaze. "Me," the leader said. "I am the new master of the Shadow Sector." Then a pulse of raw power erupted. Every light in the room flickered violently. The three most feared rulers of the underworld suddenly felt an unseen force crushing them. Lucian's gun levitated out of his grip, twisting midair before slamming into the far wall. "What the?" he shouted, but even speaking felt like a struggle. Celine, always composed, always in control, felt her body forced to its knees. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her own willpower meant nothing. And Zajul, a being of pure darkness, a nightmare feared even by ancient demons, for the first time he felt pain. "This cannot be," Zajul roared. He was eternal, indestructible. But now it felt as if his very essence was being drained. His black armor cracked, and the infernal glow in his eyes began to dim. The leader raised a hand, an orb of swirling energy forming in their palm. "You do not know me," they said, "but you will." With a flick of the wrist, the energy was hurled toward Zajul. A piercing scream filled the room. Zajul's body flickered, turning semi-transparent for a brief moment. For the first time, an immortal being felt the touch of mortality. Lucian and Celine were silent because they understood. They could not stand against this power. The leader scanned the room, watching the three fallen lords in their newfound helplessness. "For years, this sector has been ruled by your greed, your betrayals, and your bloodshed," the voice echoed. "But everything changes now." The remaining bounty hunters and soldiers in the room raised their weapons. "I am now the only ruler here." Lucian gritted his teeth. "If you're going to kill us, then do it already," he growled. "But I will never kneel." The leader approached Lucian, crouching beside him, and whispered, "The game is over, Lucian. You've lost, but if you want to live, you will kneel." Lucian's eyes burned with fury, but beneath that there was fear. Celine took a deep breath, then slowly she lowered her head. "Zajul." He struggled back to his feet. His eyes still burned, though the fire was dimmed. "You cannot kill me," Zajul growled, his voice both shaky and arrogant. "But you can make me bow, for now." The leader stood tall, nodding in satisfaction. "You will all remain here. You will still gamble. You will still spill blood. But now you will do so under my rules." The leader slammed a hand against the table, sending a shock wave of energy through the room. "Swear loyalty to me, or I will tear your souls apart, here and now." Lucian, Celine, Zajul, they all knew. They had no choice. The new ruler turned and walked out of the ruined casino, their soldiers following in silent formation. Behind them, the three fallen lords remained, kneeling in the darkness. For the first time in history, they had bowed to another. But one question remained. Would they truly serve their new master, or were they merely biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike back? The Shadow Sector now belonged to a single ruler. But who could say if chaos was truly over? The mysterious leader strode out of the Eternal Night Casino, radiating the arrogance of victory. His soldiers followed in disciplined silence, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Inside, the ones who remained were lost in thought. Lucian, Celine, and Zajul. They had a decision to make. Would they truly submit to this new ruler? Lucian's fists clenched. He had never been one to take orders. Celine closed her eyes, taking a slow, steady breath. The game was not over yet. Zajul remained silent. For the first time, he had been forced to bow to another, but the hellfire within him still burned. "This isn't over," Lucian whispered. Selene lifted her head. Zazul narrowed his eyes, and in that moment they understood each other. For the first time, they stood united. Scattered chips and overturned cards still littered the table, but the stakes were now far greater. Lucian's eyes darkened as he spoke. "We don't know who this man is, but one thing is certain. He has a weakness." Selene smirked. "And until we find it, we'll act like his loyal dogs." Zazul's gaze locked onto the flickering neon lights. His claim to immortality had been shaken, but that only meant one thing. No matter how powerful an enemy was, they could be destroyed. "We have time," he said in a low, ominous tone. "For now, we kneel. But when the day comes, I will drink his blood." Lucian nodded. "We wait. We make him trust us." Selene twirled a poker chip between her fingers, a mischievous gleam in her eye. "And then we'll make him play a game he can never win." They exchanged glances. For years they had been rivals, but now, for the first time, they were on the same side. And they would wait patiently for revenge. Years passed. After the fall of Eternal Night, the Shadow Sector had completely changed. The three most notorious figures of the criminal underworld, Lucian Black, Selene Veyron, and Zazul, had all bowed before a new master. His name was Varos Kane. Varos Kane was a ruthless leader. Under his rule, the Shadow Sector became more structured, more disciplined, but also far more terrifying. There was no room for rebellion. Kane's influence stretched from the smallest crime syndicates to the largest galactic smuggling rings. Lucian, Selene, and Zazul had served him for years. They trained his assassins, managed his casinos, and expanded his wealth. They eliminated his enemies and swore absolute loyalty to him. But all of it had been for one reason: revenge. And now, the time had come. At the highest peak of the Shadow Sector, Kane's Black Tower loomed over the world below. Tonight, it was Varos Kane's birthday. As tradition demanded, the three lords had gathered once more to show their allegiance. A grand banquet had been arranged, and hundreds had gathered in the Black Tower to honor Kane. But tonight was not just a celebration. Tonight was an execution. Lucian Black raised his glass, his eyes locked on Varos Kane. "The Shadow Sector was reborn under your rule, my lord," he said smoothly. "Tonight, we reaffirm our loyalty to you." Selene Veyron lowered her head slightly, a sly smile on her lips. "We have grown under your shadow," she purred. "We have become stronger because of you." Zazul lifted his gaze, his eyes glowing once more with crimson fire. "And tonight, we have brought you a gift," he said, his voice deep and ominous. Varos Kane studied them carefully. He was always skeptical, but for years these three had shown no signs of betrayal. "A gift?" he asked, his voice calm. "Trying to impress me, are you?" Lucian smirked. "Of course. And I do hope you like it." And that was when the plan was set into motion. Beneath the table, Selene subtly activated a small device hidden on her wrist. At that moment, every entrance to the Black Tower sealed shut. No soldiers could enter, no guests could escape. Varos Kane narrowed his eyes. "What is this?" he asked coldly. Lucien reached into his coat and pulled out a small holographic sphere. It hovered in midair before releasing a high-frequency pulse that shook the entire tower. Kane's guards collapsed instantly, their weapons, armor, and nervous systems completely shut down. Varos Kane's gaze darkened. "You deceived me." Zajul stood slowly, his towering figure casting a shadow over the table. "Kane," he said, his tone as cold as death. "For years, we have fed you. We have carried your bloody throne. But tonight, we tear it down." Celine drew a dagger from her cloak and set it on the table. "The dice have been cast," she whispered, "and this time the winners are us." Lucien stepped forward, facing Kane directly. "Now," he exhaled, "let's play the final round of this game." Varos Kane laughed, but it was a deadly laugh. "You think you can overthrow me?" Kane said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You think killing me will be that easy?" And then something shifted in the air. A powerful energy wave exploded through the room. Lucien, Celine, and Zajul felt it instantly. Varos Kane was not an ordinary man. Their plan was flawless. But what if Kane had been waiting for this moment too? Something was wrong. Varos Kane's face twisted, his eyes now glowing with an eerie black light. "Did you truly believe you could kill me?" And in that instant, the tower shook. Chaos had erupted in the Black Tower. Lucien Black, Zajul, and Selene Veyron had waited for this moment for years. Varos Kane's downfall was only seconds away. The doors were sealed, his guards had been neutralized, and now their leader stood completely defenseless. Lucien drew his laser blade. Zajul's eyes burned with fiery rage. Selene smirked, twirling her dagger in her hand. "We've fed you for years, Kane," Lucien said coldly. "But now the game is over." Zajul raised his hands, binding Kane in chains of ancient, abyssal magic. "You cannot escape," he hissed, "and now your time is up." For the first time, Varos Kane was facing the real threat of destruction. He had always been one step ahead, but this time there was nowhere left to run. Lucien raised his blade, ready to strike the final blow. And then something went terribly wrong. As Lucien thrust his dagger toward Kane's chest, a sudden burning pain tore through him. A black dagger pierced through his chest. Time slowed. Lucien gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Selene Veyron had stabbed him in the back. Zajul staggered back in disbelief. "What have you done?" Selene tilted her head slightly, a playful smirk on her lips. "Did you really think you could defeat Varos Kane? This is a game, Lucien." "Trust?" she laughed. "No one in this sector trusts anyone. The strong survive, and I don't stand with the weak." Lucien's breathing grew weaker. It was over. Zajul tried to make one last move, but Kane was already prepared. Varos Kane raised his hands, and a vortex of energy swirled in the air. "Your time is up," he declared, "and now your souls belong to me." Lucien's body lifted into the air, surrounded by tendrils of black energy. Zajul's infernal fire dimmed. He let out a final roar of agony before being pulled into Kane's grasp. And then silence. Their bodies crumpled to the floor, but their souls now belonged to Varos Kane. Celine stepped beside Kane, handing him a glass of wine. "You've won," she said. Varos Kane smirked. "No, Celine, we have won. Lucian and Zajul, once the most feared lords of crime, now nothing more than cursed souls, enslaved by Kane's mark." Celine and Kane walked together through the highest floors of the Black Tower. "What happens now?" Celine asked. Varos Kane smiled. "Now everything belongs to us." The Shadow Sector now belonged to Varos Kane and Celine Veyron. Lucian Black and Zajul's souls had been stolen, their bodies collapsed, their existence trapped in eternal servitude. Kane had become a powerful ruler, but Celine, she was more dangerous than ever. At the peak of the Black Tower, Celine stood by the window, gazing out into the vastness of space. The greatest criminal empire in the galaxy was now in their hands. But for a fleeting moment, the cold smirk on her lips faded. Lucian and Zajul's souls had not been destroyed. Somewhere they were still searching for a way back. One day somewhere Varos Kane's power would waver, and Celine Veyron's betrayal would not be forgotten. Because in the Shadow Sector there was only one rule: trust no one, especially not Celine Veyron.